Hello, fellow travelers, and greetings from beautiful San Diego, California. This is John. We are about 2 weeks away from the start of our tour, and I wanted to offer you something. If you got time, you might enjoy this. If you're busy, you can just delete this video. I will not hold it against you, and there won't be a test. The last time I went to Israel, I have to confess to you, I was super duper confused because there are so many dates. There are so many epics. They will talk about the time of the patriarchs, the time of the Romans, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, and it is all very, very confusing. So what I thought I would offer to you today is a really quick primer to go through some important Old Testament and New Testament dates, talk a little bit about the history so you can have some sort of context. And I want to let you know ahead of time, I'm going to throw out some general dates here. If you Wikipedia me, you're going to find me off by a few years here and there. I'm just trying to give you a 5,000 foot elevation viewpoint for when we are in Israel together. The Old Testament, the first 11 books, there's a ton of debate about when it happened. When did the Garden of Eden happen? When did Jonah happen? When did the Great Flood happen? Woof. Okay, a lot of debate. You can have three people that you respect who will give you three total different versions of that. We're not going to try to figure out the first 11 chapters in the book of Genesis. For our purposes, we're going to count everything before Abraham, and Genesis chapter 12 is prehistory. And what we're really going to talk about as our first important time period is the age of the patriarchs. This is beginning in Genesis 12 with a guy named Abram. Abram comes over from Ur of Chaldeans, which is modern-day Babylon in Iraq, and he begins to go back and forth between modern-day Iraq, Israel, and Egypt. And that's basically the whole book of Genesis is Abram and Isaac and Jacob and his family. They go here, they go there, they're here, they're there, back to Egypt, back up to Israel, back over. He's all over the place. That time period is 2100 to 1800 before the birth of Christ. So as far away as we are from when Jesus was here is how far away Jesus was from when Abraham lived. They're both the same guy, either Abram or Abraham. 2100 to 1800 BC. Here's what's impressive. When we go to the Dan, the area of Dan, there is a gate that dates to the period of Abraham. Abraham very likely walked through that gate. When we go to Megiddo, one of the layers of civilization will date back to the time of Abraham. And even more compelling, it'll even date back before his time. So that's what we call the patriarchs. Anything with the patriarchs is super duper old. You know, they have the burial. We won't be going there, but they have Abraham's tomb and Isaac and Jacob's tomb. That is the time of the patriarchs. That is way back when, 2100 to 1800. All right, the next big period of time is we're going to call the time of Moses and Joshua. Moses never entered the promised land, right? The story is he went to Mount Nebo. God allowed him to look at the nation of Israel, or the country of Israel, but didn't allow him to go in. Joshua was allowed to go in. This all roughly happened around 1500 BC. And again, theologians and historians and archaeologists have huge debates. We are not even going to touch that today. For our rules, we'll just say 1500 BC, plus or minus. And Joshua, you do remember, beginning with the second book of the Bible, the sixth book of the Bible, which is titled Joshua, he enters the promised land. So that happens after 1500 BC. Not a lot of ruins or stuff that talks about that, although we will see a few. The real important next time period is the time of the monarchy, and that happens in 1000 BC. Much of the Old Testament is dealing with the establishment of the monarchy. That's why whenever you hear a name like King Saul, King David, or King Solomon, that is the beginning of the monarchy, and that happened in 1000 BC. Who built Jerusalem? Who really established it as a city? King David. When we go again to Megiddo, you will find a layer where King Solomon helped build up Megiddo. We will visit the ancient city of David, all of the ruins and the walls, the temple that was built by Solomon. The time of the monarchy at 1000 BC will be super important, and when you hear the name David, Saul, or Solomon, you think 1000 BC, before the arrival of Christ. After that period of time, the Old Testament goes through a series of prophets. Basically, the nation unravels. There's two huge dates that happen that will impact our tour. The first is in 722 BC, when the Assyrians come over and they begin to destroy the nation of Israel. Of course, all of God's Old Testament prophets were warning the people to repent. They didn't. And so they were initially destroyed by the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. And King Nebuchadnezzar came over in 598 BC, and that is when the temple was destroyed. So when we go to the Wailing Wall at the Temple Mount, that is the holy site that dates back to the destruction of 598 BC by the Babylonians. We're also going to walk into Hezekiah's tunnel. That happened around that same period of time. So we're going to call that period of time either the monarchy itself, again, David, beginning in order, Saul, David, and Solomon, or all the rest of the kings up until the Babylonian captivity, when the nation basically collapsed. The rest of the Old Testament tells the story of a gradual rebuilding. Nehemiah and Ezra are allowed to come back. And then ultimately things disintegrate. And then the prophet Malachi is the last book that is written, and that is written in 400 BC. There's 400 silent years before the arrival of Christ, and a few significant things happen. The first, obviously, is that there's a Hellenistic period where Alexander the Great comes over. He conquers the land peacefully, and he builds a few cities. When we go to Caesarea Philippi, that's obviously a Greek name. That was built during the Hellenistic period. That works us all the way up to the beginning of the New Testament. So we span the New Testament about 120 years. It's all during the Roman era. To understand the life and the time of Jesus, you have to understand what was going on during the Roman era. A name that you have to really pay attention to is Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the one that rebuilt the temple that had been destroyed by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Herod the Great built Caesarea Maritima. It's Herod the Great who builds Masada. We will hear a lot about Herod. He was, although not Roman, he was like a benefactor or a partner with Rome. Jesus was born in a country that was occupied by the Romans. Anytime we encounter architecture that is Roman, it is of the era of Jesus or Paul or Peter. The entire New Testament was written during the Roman era. So when we hear Romans, we're going to think about 200 before the birth of Christ and 200 years after the birth of Christ. Right after the Roman era is the Byzantines. And who are the Byzantines? Rome was sacked and invaded by the Vandals and the Gauls, and so they moved their headquarters, the church, moved their headquarters out of Rome and over into Constantinople, which is modern day, oh my gosh, Turkey, the name's escaping me, 3, 2, 1, Istanbul. So the Byzantines are, although Turkish, they're also Greek influenced, and Byzantine means complex. When you see Byzantine architecture, that means it's very busy and twisty and complex. So the Byzantine era starts around 324 AD. We will see a lot of Byzantine churches. When you see a Byzantine church, that means probably either the Turkish Christians, or the Greek Christians came over and built them. Then in 638, we have the Arab Caliphate, and of course that revolves around Muhammad, who comes in and also does something else that's just a little bit controversial, which is he decided to build the mosque, his mosque, right on top of where the old temple used to be. So all of that Temple Mount conflict and whatnot, that began to happen. It became realized in 638 AD. That is when you have the Muslim quarter in Jerusalem. All of that begins to happen in 638 AD. Of course, as a reaction to the Arab Caliphate, around 1000 AD, the European Crusaders came over. They would primarily waylay at the island of Rhodes, and then they came to win back the Holy Land from the Arabs. And so you will see a lot of architecture regarding the Crusader era. There will be fortresses, there will be walls. Tiberias, which is not far from the Sea of Galilee, was a Crusader city. Outside of Jerusalem, you will see a lot of Crusader, not temples, castles. Even inside of Jerusalem, a lot of the architecture that we will see will be from the Crusader era. Then you will go to the Ottomans. The Ottomans were the Ottoman Turks that came in 1517. The walls of Jerusalem, this is your moment of disappointment. The walls of Jerusalem that we see were all put up by the Ottoman Turks. They're about 500 years old. They're not the original. They're not even the double original. They're kind of new. Up until 1917, when the British finally took over. Whew. I don't know if you're more confused or less confused over that, but I wanted you to understand your time periods. I've also put in a really good timeline for you to look at. So when we're sitting there walking through Jerusalem, you can know about the monarchy, the patriarchs, the Romans, the Byzantines, everything else like that. I hope this was helpful to you, or at least neutral and not completely confusing to you. Look over the map and we'll look forward to personally experiencing these places soon.